Hi everybody, welcome to Life in France. Life in France versus the UK. And in today's video, I'm talking about Filipinos living in France compared to Filipinos living in the UK. Naomi, my partner, is Filipino. We've been together now for 8 years, seeing each other for 9. And she lived and worked in the UK for 9 years before moving to France. And in this video, it's a little bit controversial. Naomi, I've been saying, do you want to do this on our main channel? And she was a bit reluctant to do this video. So I've said, right, okay, I'll do it on Life in France. Because it's not to have a dig at anyone. I'm hoping that the Filipinos watching this in the Philippines will think twice, perhaps, about coming to France. Because, to be honest, I don't think it's great for a Filipino to come and live in France. I'll explain why and what the differences are. I arrived in France in 2006. Naomi started living here in 2012. And for the first few years of being here, we didn't come across any Filipinos in Brittany. And then we were at a Kentucky Fried Chicken in Lorient one day, and there was 2 Filipino, or appeared to be 2 Filipino girls with their children. And I went up and said, "Excuse me, are you Filipino?" And they said yes, and that's how we met them. And as soon as we met those 2 Filipino girls, we were introduced to like a network of Filipinos that were living in Brittany. And what I discovered was quite astonishing, and that's why I've decided to make this video, to help Filipinos who are considering starting a life in France, just to give them a word of warning. Now, we met these 2 girls. They, as I said, introduced us to this network, and it was like run by 3 matriarchs, 3 women that are in their 50s, been in France for quite some time. They sort of ruled the rest of the Filipino girls. It was a really strange scenario in that we'd go to one of these Filipino women's house, because Naomi was younger. You guys are going to know this, you have to call them auntie. And we always used to say, please don't give us any food. We're just here to see you. But they'd pile loads of food on you. And I think really it was all part of, yes, hospitality, but also part control. It was as though they were trying to make you feel as though you owed them. And sometimes we'd go to one particular house and there'd be 2 or 3 new Filipino women within the house, basically just socialising. And Naomi would perhaps get on with one of them really well, and she'd ask for a phone number, and this particular girl had to ask the matriarch if it was okay to give her her number. Can you believe that? These other Filipino women were so scared of these matriarchs that they had to ask permission that it was okay to give Naomi their phone number. I was astonished by it. And the reason I say you have to be very careful if you're moving to France, girls or guys, is that if you're not fluent in French, you're not going to be able to find a job. You have to be fluent in French before you can start working in France. So I can't understand why Filipinos will want to come to France. Why not Australia, America, the UK, where they speak English? Because the thing is, not being funny, but if anything was to happen with the relationship that you start, you're more independent in those countries because you can speak English already. You're going to be able to find a job. You're going to have your own independence, have your own money. In France, what I've noticed, firstly, all these Filipino girls, the majority of them, were under the expectation that they were going to be living in Paris or some nice city. They had no idea that their husbands were going to be living in the middle of nowhere. We've seen one girl, she'd been in France for 9 years. Brittany is renowned for its coastline. It's surrounded by the sea. In 9 years, this Filipino girl has never been taken to the sea. Her husband's a farmer. For 9 years, all this girl's been doing is shoveling cow poo. Her face, like her husband's face, is red. I guess because of the acidity in the air. Her life is been shoveling cow poo while in France. So many of these girls we've been speaking to, and they said, oh, I thought I was going to be living in Paris. And they're really unhappy the fact that they're living in rural Brittany. Because if you haven't got a car, if you can't drive, you can't get anywhere in rural France. It's so important that you drive. So a lot of these girls are coming over, they don't have the language skills, and they can't drive. They're totally reliant upon their husbands. Talking of which, I semi-retired at the age of 40 to France. And all the husbands, I just cannot click with them. The ones that I've seen in France. I'm sorry guys, but they're all a bunch of losers. They're either living with their mums still at the age of 40, 45 and deciding that they need to get a wife. They can't find one in Brittany, so they've got one and bought themselves a wife in the Philippines. And these guys, they've got no success coming from them whatsoever. You know, they're mummy's boys. We went to one house, and I understand the local mayor went to the guy and said, you need to find a bigger house. You cannot bring up your family in this house. The house was so small, it was tucked away in the middle of nowhere, and we never ventured upstairs. We never actually saw their upstairs. But downstairs it was so dingy, and it never appeared as though a woman had been living in that house. The guy was totally, I don't know, you know, one of these guys, bit nerdy. The house was just all masculine, and it had all his stuff in it, and yet he shared that house with his Filipino wife and 2 children. And I can't understand how anyone could live in such a tiny house, and yet they did. The only 2 guys that I got on with were non-French. There was one guy, an Italian, lovely guy, and he was just your normal bloke. You know, he's been sort of had a lot of girlfriends in the past. He was married, and I got on really well with him. He was 52, 53, and I think his wife was 23. But he was such a nice chap. There was also another guy, again, non-French. He was half Italian, half Arab, and he was such a nice guy. He was a bit older, he was like 63, but I got on with him so well. But the French husbands of Filipinos, I just couldn't gel with. There was one instance, one of these other matriarchs, that we went round to their house, and the way he looked at me when he realised I was English, he just sort of turned his back on me and walked off, and we were introduced to his wife, and we got on well with his wife. And I got so fed up with this guy's attitude. Sorry, my eyes are watering. I got so fed up with this guy's attitude. Now, I've never ever sung karaoke in my life. I would never dream of doing it. But the Filipinos, as you know, like karaoke. And Naomi and this girl started singing karaoke. And I looked through the pamphlet, and I chose deliberately to wind this guy up. So I did Right Said Fred, I'm Too Sexy. He was sitting there watching the women sing. As soon as I got up and sung, he just literally turned his back on me and just stared out the window. But I really didn't care. And the thing was, at that point, I was trying to be friendly with these guys. And he came out a comment right at the end when we were going. And he turned around to Naomi and said, oh, if ever you split up with Mark, I'll find you a nice French man. Can you believe someone would have the audacity to do that? If I wasn't trying to make friends and trying to create this circle of Filipino friends for Naomi, I think I would have lumped the guy, or at least given him a verbal bashing. But I've never ever come across anyone to be so rude as that. But hey, sometimes that's life in France. What else can I say? Yeah, girls, listen. Make sure you know who you're marrying and where they live and their circumstances, because we've seen so many unhappy Filipinos that are living in France, and they've actually said to me they can't believe that me, as an Englishman, has moved to France, because they're just so sick of France, they actually want to go to the UK because they can speak English there. They can have their own independence. They can find jobs easy. In France, these girls are just relying upon their husbands. As I mentioned, their husbands aren't successful in the general rule. They're not on high-earning jobs. They're on your basic, they're sort of factory workers. They're on minimum wage. They're living in really tiny accommodation in the middle of nowhere. And these girls move over from the Philippines and they're just stuck in these houses in the middle of nowhere, totally relying upon their husband. Oh, and by the way, when they arrive in France, their husband, who was speaking English to them when they were in the Philippines, in the courting process, as soon as they come back to France, that's it, no more English, we're just going to speak French. Yes, that's good, but, you know, all of a sudden they refuse to speak English to them and they force them to speak the French. But then again, that is good because they have to have the assimilation. But it takes so long to become fluent in French. Those girls are just reliant upon their husbands for so long. They can't get the independence. And that's the difference between Filipinos living in the UK to Filipinos living in France. Because, at least in the UK, the girls can speak, and guys can speak English. So you can get your own jobs, have your own money, and have your independence. And also, not being funny, but the majority of people in the UK aren't living in the rural areas. You know, there's a lot of Filipinos in a lot of cities and towns. So they have more freedom just because of where they're living. But in rural France, you know, you're really stuck. Now, I've sort of really given life in France a bashing for Filipinos. But I'm going to share with you a story that Naomi told me about a girl she knew in the UK. You're not going to believe this story, guys. The girl, she had 4 or 5 brothers. She was the middle child. And whereas the brothers and sisters were allowed to date by the mum back in the Philippines, this particular girl, she was stuck in the middle. She was the 3rd child. She wasn't allowed to date Filipino men. You know, some Filipino men would come to the house asking to date her and the mum would say no. And I think the reason was the mum was saving this child, she was a spare child, to basically get married to a Westerner. That may sound hard to believe, guys, but from what I've heard since, the family were expecting this girl to get married to a Westerner, get money coming in and send it back to the Philippines. It was like a spare child. So this particular girl started talking to an Englishman, and one of the things as an Englishman you have to do, I believe, if you go and marry a Filipino in the Philippines, is you have to show that you're financially secure. You have to show that you have £10,000 in your bank account. This guy actually borrowed £10,000 from a friend, had it transferred into his account so he could show that he had money behind him. He's then gone off to the Philippines and acted like a millionaire out there. Splashed out gifts on all the family members. They got married and they then both came back to the UK to find that he didn't have a lot of money and he was in his mum's ex-council house. His mum had died and he'd been left this ex-council house. So he was mortgage free. Or that's what she thought. And then what happened, she wasn't working initially, and after about 6 months this guy was getting really depressed and started to cry, and he had loads of bills coming in. And he then turned round to the girl and said, I have to confess, I'm drowning in debt. You need to go out and work to help pay for this debt. You need to go out and work and help pay for all the gifts and the wedding that I paid in the Philippines, because I borrowed money to pay for all of that. Turns out this chap actually bought a book on how to influence a Filipino family, how to win over a Filipino family. Can you believe that? Again, this is an English guy who's really never had a girlfriend in his life, and he's gone over to the Philippines at the age of 45 or 50 and found himself a young Filipino girl and basically lied his socks off. Both were Christians. He was supposed to be a born again Christian, as she was, and yet he lied his socks off. And he actually said to her, "You're my wife, you need to go out to work to start paying for these debts. Oh, and by the way, I need to consolidate all these debts and put it on top of my mortgage, and I need you to sign your name on my debts," which she did because she was his wife. So whoever you do marry, be very, very careful, because not only can you get caught up in France, you can become a cropper in the UK as well. So I'm just pleading with everybody in the Philippines who are thinking of starting a new life abroad, just make sure you know who you're marrying and you know their circumstances. Because, as I said, if a born again Christian can lie his socks off, anybody can. You know, we do see a lot of Filipinos from our YouTube channel who seem really happy. And Naomi mentioned just that one instance, that who she came across in the UK that I've just talked about. But she said the difference that she's noticed regarding Filipinos living in France compared to the Filipinos living in the UK, the Filipinos in the UK all have good jobs. They're not reliant upon their partners or husbands. The Filipinos in the UK all go out to work, they all have their own money, and they all have their independence. Whereas in France, all the girls we've met do not have jobs. They do not have their own money, and they don't have their own independence. And that's the big difference. So be very careful, guys, if you're looking to marry a French guy, because you could be coming unstuck. I think you're better off with English. I did say this channel wasn't going to be politically correct all the time, guys, but I really felt as though I needed to make this video on Filipinos living in France just to protect other Filipinos from making mistakes. Because the majority of Filipinos we've seen that are living in France all regret where they're living and who they're living with. They all prefer to be either in Paris or in the UK. Everyone we've met has said, "Oh, I'd love to be in Paris," or "I'd love to be living in the UK." None of them are happy living in rural France. So just be careful. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video on life in France and life in France versus the UK. I hope I haven't upset anyone. I haven't meant to. I'm doing this video just to help other Filipinos because, you know, I love the Filipinos, and, you know, my partner's Filipino, and I want to make sure that I do my little bit to make sure everybody's happy. And I'm not here to upset anyone. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Take care, and I'll see you again soon.